So, it's suggested that if the United States didn't have an overseas empire, then maybe the United States wasn't really a great country by the standards that Europeans have set up for what makes you a great country. So here in the United States, after all of the Indians of the West had been defeated, the United States began thinking, do we need an overseas empire? What's Uncle Sam doing here?
He's taking over South America.
Yeah, he's sort of trying to decide, what do I want from here? So, the United States was now looking to build an overseas empire, because many people in the United States thought that's what great countries do. Americans paid particular attention to events down here in Cuba. Cuba, just off the tip of Florida. And in Cuba, the Cuban people were fighting a guerrilla war to try to win their independence. The Cubans wanted independence from who?
Spanish.
Spain. Right. Cuba was part of Spain's empire. And the Cuban people wanted freedom and independence. Stories of how terrible the Spanish were acting in Cuba made their way into the American press. And the Spanish really did do some terrible things down in Cuba. But the American press made the stories sound even worse than they truly were. And many Americans now begin to say things like, we've got to help Cuba. We've got to help Cuba. Someone must help Cuba. Let's go help Cuba. Now, some people who say that, they want to go help Cuba, meaning help Cuba get what? Independence. But other people who say, let's go help Cuba, they mean, let's get the Spanish out of Cuba, and then what? Take it over. And make it an American colony.
They'll owe us.
Right.
They'll owe us.
Well, the idea is that we would just add it to an American empire. It would be ours. And the Cubans' desire for independence can, they can do whatever they want with it. Not going to happen. So, if you just say, should we help Cuba? Lots of Americans say yes. But it's what we would do next that really divides people. Well, in 1898, the United States declared war on Spain. The United States declares war on Spain, and they're fighting each other over what?
Cuba.
Cuba. Right. So the Spanish-American War is really about Cuba. So where would the first battle be?
Cuba.
The Philippines. What? Over here on the other side of the globe, the Philippines was also a Spanish colony. And who are we at war with?
Spain.
Spain. So the United States sailed their navy around the world to the Philippines and beat the crap out of the Spanish Navy and took over the Philippines. Guess what the Filipino people had wanted?
Freedom. Be free in Spain.
To be free and independent. And when the American Navy sailed into the Philippines, the Filipinos cheered because they thought they're here to get rid of the Spanish. And then the Americans defeat the Spanish
And they stay there.
and stay there. Right. Now, for this war, black people would be part of the military again, like they were in the Civil War and like they were out west. Remember there were those 4 units that were kept in the army? The 4 units of black men who served out in the west? They are now going to be sent to the war in Cuba. As would other black units put together just for this conflict. So those 4 regiments, remember, are in the Army permanently. But other units are created just for this conflict. And then what are they going to do with those units as soon as the conflict's over?
Get rid of them.
Right, disband them, send the guys home. Most of the places where black soldiers were sent to train were in the South. The military bases where they're trained are in the segregated South. And that means that black people are treated terribly anytime they leave the military base. And really, how are things on the military base?
Terrible.
Things aren't that great there either. They're just worse when you go out into town. And so what became known as the Tampa Rebellion started with the same kind of callousness toward black people's lives that you could find happening every day somewhere in the South. But what's going to play out differently here is that there are a group of armed black men in town now. You know? Soldiers training for war. And a lot of these, remember the black men who've been out west fighting Indians, right? They were now being sent to Cuba. And that means they had to ride trains coming all the way from, you know, like the Dakotas, and come all the way down to Florida. That means they had to ride segregated trains all through the American South. And this is not just any black person we're talking about. Who are these guys? They're soldiers in the United States Army. And as they rode those segregated trains through the South, they sat in the first-class cars. They sat in the first-class cars. And they sort of dared somebody to do something about it. And 2 black soldiers were shot by train conductors. But they never went and sat in the smoking car. They rode in the first-class car. And after, that's just getting to Florida, right? Then, stationed in Tampa, they were harassed every time they moved around the city of Tampa. Why does a black soldier outrage a white supremacist more than an ordinary black person?
Why isn't there a white soldier here? They're taking our jobs.
Yeah, that's part of it. How does that black soldier conduct himself?
With manners, civilized.
Right. He is dignified. He is proud. He walks like a man. And that infuriates white supremacists who want to see black people shuffling their feet and scraping and bowing and yes sir and bossing. And so seeing soldiers walk around town with their chests puffed out and not stepping off the sidewalk, this outrages white supremacists. They're denied service at all of Tampa's racist businesses. You know, they can't sit down at a restaurant. They can't stay off base at a hotel. Even the whorehouses denied them service. So then, on a hot day in Tampa, a group of white soldiers training in Tampa decided to have some fun. And these white soldiers took a young black boy from his screaming mother. He was a toddler, probably 2 or 3 years old. And they took this little kid from his mother and stood him up against a brick wall and had a contest to see who could get their bullet closest to the toddler without shooting him. You know, they're not trying to shoot him. And they now discharge their weapons into this brick wall all around this little boy, frightened and crying against the wall. And they're holding the mother, who's screaming and crying. And then they're done, and they sort of let her go. She runs, grabs her child. They're all laughing, drinking. Now, normally, is there anything she could do about this?
No.
Nothing. But right now, there is something she can do. Who does she go to tell?
The black
The
soldiers.
soldiers.
The black soldiers stationed in Tampa. And remember, they are already pissed off at how they've been treated here. So they take their guns, which you're not supposed to leave base with, they take their guns and go looking for the white soldiers that did it. And when they couldn't find the white soldiers that did it, they just took out their anger and frustration on all of those white-owned businesses that had been denying them service for the last several weeks. They shut up some white-owned restaurants, white-owned hotels. In the end, they had to bring in another regiment of white soldiers